This is class number 6. I'm keeping track of how many classes it's going to take to complete 74 verses from chapter 7, which to speak of 29, chapter 29 is where this Uddhava Gita ends. It's a long section. So just a little review. Shavadamangala? Is that camera showing something? Or no? Is it just this? It's just both. Okay. It's probably better tomorrow. I'm sitting over there because this is a side view. Right? Okay, thanks. In chapter 6, which comes before chapter 7, the cursing of the Yadu dynasty, the reporting of that cursing to Ugrasena, Ugrasena deciding what to do, the demigods come to visit Krishna and Dwaraka. They specifically say, you've fulfilled your commitment, you've been here for 125 autumns, and then later during these instructions to Uddhava, Krishna again uses the 125 years, solar years, Earth's solar years. And you fulfilled your commitment. As you wish, you may return to your abode. And Krishna then contemplates, I've done this and that and the other thing. The members of the Yadu dynasty also have to depart. The stage is already set, of course, by his internal potency. And I want to deliver transcendental knowledge to Uddhava so that he can carry the message, the teachings, which is this chapter 7 onwards, to Narayana Rishis, the sages there in Badrik Ashram, and go here and there in the world and deliver transcendental knowledge to those who are unnecessarily suffering. And then after that contemplation, Uddhava understands Krishna is going to depart. He didn't say anything to Uddhava, but he knows Krishna's mood because of his intimacy. And he comes to Krishna saying two basic things besides glorification. Please take me with you. I won't be able to bear separation from you. And can you please give a simple explanation so that people like me who are very attached to the temporary can understand you? So that's the introduction to chapter 7. Krishna begins giving his teachings, and we've heard the emphasis, no surprise, once again is bhakti. And at the beginning of the instructions to Uddhava is detachment from the temporary. And that's what we've been hearing. And it's pretty strong. It's not different than Krishna's instruction to Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita, but the manner of presentation is very strong. And here's a little review for some of the artwork you're about to see. This is Shruti Mangara's classical artwork. These are little excerpts from 8 and 9, and then we're moving on to 9 and 10. In the Vedas, there are injunctions and prohibitions that appear to accept good and evil among material things, but the ultimate purpose of Vedic regulations is to create a favorable situation for spiritual life. very similar to many other places in the Bhagavatam, seeing friend and enemy, good and evil, these are material. But wait a minute, the Vedas speak also of things to be done, things not to be done, pravritti and nivritti, and so what's spiritual and what's material? And they're material standing alone. They have benefit for helping to achieve the ultimate purpose. And Sri Dayananda Maharaj's really clever way of saying it. Supposing you go to the airport, the purpose of going to the airport is to get on a plane. Supposing you miss your flight. You're no better off than the person that didn't go to the airport because you missed your flight. So going to the airport is really helpful to get the flight. There's benefit to be derived from the do's and the don'ts, the auspicious, inauspicious, injunctions, prohibitions, and so forth. But they're subordinate to and pursuant to knowing Krishna. And if their knowing Krishna isn't the goal and is not progressed, what to speak of achieving Shama Evi Kevalam. So this is very similar message in Uddhava Gita. Since the material mode of goodness purifies one's consciousness and creates a hankering for higher knowledge, it is a favorable platform from which to pursue spiritual life. Then comes the airport example. Just like the airport is a favorable place from which to travel. So here's an airport. I think it's LaGuardia. If a man, this is the metaphor, if the man desires to travel from New York to London, the New York airport is certainly the most favorable place from which to travel. But LaGuardia doesn't go there, I have to go to JFK. But if the man misses his plane, he is no longer, closer to London than anyone in New York who did not go to the airport. In other words, the advantage of the airport is meaningful only if one catches his plane. So that's in the purport of text 8. And then text 9. The individual living entity exists for the pleasure of the personality of Godhead and is the Lord's eternal servant. As soon as the senses become absorbed in sense gratification, they lose their power to experience the absolute truth. So that's from text 9, and that's where we'll be going to begin this morning. And there's a lot to read, so I'm going to read fast. You have to listen. Translation for text 9. Therefore, bringing all your senses under control and thus subduing the mind, you should see the entire world as situated within the self, with a small s, who is expanded everywhere. There's living entities everywhere, not one living entity is everywhere. And you should also see the individual self within me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And it's a very nice purport by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. By executing devotional service, all of one's senses become properly engaged. Then only can one realize that Krishna is the controller of all and that he is situated within everybody as the Supersoul. At that time, all the senses become engaged in the service of the master of the senses and thus become free from material designations. Paragraph. Impersonalists try to cease all sense enjoyment, thinking that is the perfectional stage. The living entity becomes inert. However, such self-abnegation simply denies one the opportunity to realize the absolute truth with transcendental senses. The fact is that the master of the senses, Krishna, who is the only proper object of all the senses, is realized by rendering devotional service with all the senses. Paragraph. Because the conditioned souls have rejected their constitutional position, and because they want to enjoy without God in this material world, which is created by the illusory energy of the Lord, they fall into bewilderment, thinking themselves as something other than eternal servants of the Supreme Lord, or as instruments for the Lord's service. That is why Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, instructed his pure devotee Uddhava, just as Prahlad instructed his father, Hiranyakashipu. Paragraph. Attached householders who do not see how everything is related to Krishna are perpetually deceived, so that they cannot see the Supreme Lord as he is, because they are driven by their uncontrolled senses. Lord Vishnu is the ultimate goal of all the senses. Paragraph. The conditioned soul's propensity to enjoy the material senses is nothing but the spirit of enjoyment that is averse to devotional service. It's a standalone paragraph. When Krishna, the son of the king of Vraja, who is one without a second, becomes the only object of all the senses, then the temporary propensity of material senses is checked, and the spiritual propensity for serving the Supreme Lord with purified senses is awakened. Because there are no longer any material designations in that state of perfection, the distinction between the body and the self, between the form and the owner of the form, and between the qualities and the owner of the qualities cannot be experienced. The Supreme Lord is the only object of worship for everyone. He is the object of service for everyone, and the object of service for all the senses of everyone. The abomination, in the form of unwanted conceptions that bring about inauspiciousness in the variegated activities of this material world, cannot influence the servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vrajendra Nandana. On the spiritual platform, the considerations of Shuddha, these are the 4 disciptic succession concepts: Shuddha Dvaita, Dvaita Dvaita, Vishishta Dvaita, and Shuddha Dvaita. Distinct from Shuddha Dvaita, Shuddha Dvaita. These 4 appear to be situated on the same platform, so that the Ekanyana system is a phrase that Bhaktisiddhanta uses a lot, and it's the path of exclusive devotion. And it has its reference also, the way he uses it is the system of bhakti provided in the Pancharatrika system, or the Pancharatras of the Vedas. But it's essentially undivided devotional service. So each of those 4 are supportive of undivided devotional service. They have different ways of describing Sambandha Gyan, but bhakti is the essence, undivided bhakti is the essence of the process of approaching the Lord. And by those teachings, that undivided devotional service is not obstructed. So there's the contrast. There's obstruction, no obstruction. Bhakti that's done in this undivided devotional spirit, no obstructions. That means objects, family, home, paraphernalia, etc., etc., etc. It's not an obstacle. It's paraphernalia. It's items to be engaged in Krishna service. It's part of life. Then the flip side is the attached householder, so he's Uddhava, Krishna speaking on both sides, and the commentators are also. Paragraph. When the philosophy of Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva is revealed, the spirit souls are not seen as distant from the associates of the Lord who assist him in his pastimes. On that platform, the pure spirit soul thinks himself as the servant of Krishna and thus engages in his devotional service. Unless one sees all objects in relation to Krishna, there is bound to be inauspiciousness. That is why the devotees of the Lord consider uninterrupted service to Krishna as the constitutional and awakened propensity of the spirit soul. And the final paragraph of a long purport or commentary. People who cannot realize the Supreme Lord, the enjoyer of transcendental pastimes, become separated from Lord Achyuta and thus become faithful to temporary and imaginary objects. This is due to not understanding the essential characteristics of the Supreme Lord. In order to open the eyes of such blind people, the Lord, as the Supreme Instructor, expressed his desire to guide Uddhava and other similar servants of Uddhava who have no interest in the Karmakanda system of the Vedas by giving them invaluable instructions. This is knowledge and detachment. That the summary that commentators give is he's giving Jnana Bhakti. Bhakti that's mixed with Gyan for the purpose of detachment. Because in the mature stage, attachment is already there. Now, Uddhava doesn't need that, but he's taking the position of one who does. He's attached. And Krishna is saying, give up your attachments. Don't give up your attachments to the eternal associates of Krishna, but give up attachments to all things temporary, including family and this and that, relatives, this and that. Except all his relatives are eternal associates of Krishna. Vishwanath Chakravarti's commentary is 2 sentences long, and then we're going on to next verse. Controlling the senses and mind, please see the world made of happiness and suffering as the object of enjoyment of the jiva, Atmani, and see that enjoyer, the jiva, situated in me as the controller, Paramatma, Adishvara. That was really simple, wasn't it? Compared to that long one. So, bhakti, and bhakti is obstructed as long as there's attachment to objects of the senses in the mood of enjoying those objects of the senses. So he's teaching that principle. Detachment to knowledge, and then that assists in attachment to him. So the goal is attachment to him. And there's something that assists attachment, and that's detachment. So anasaktasya vishayan, detachment doesn't mean throw things away. It means engaging things appropriately in Krishna's service. Okay, so now we're moving on to text 10. Jnana Vijnana Samyukta. The word for word, with conclusive knowledge of the Vedas, and Vijnana is practical realization of the purpose of knowledge. So here's the translation. Being fully endowed with conclusive knowledge of the Vedas and having realized the ultimate purpose of such knowledge in practice, you will be able to perceive the pure self, and thus your mind will be satisfied. At the same time, you will become dear to all living beings headed by the demigods, and you will never be hampered by any disturbance in life. So it doesn't mean if you live in Chicago, it won't get cold, just become a nice devotee. But you won't be disturbed by the cold. Or if you stub your toe, you won't feel any pain when you stub your toe. But it means you won't be disturbed when you stub your toe, etc. That's the, I'm just listening this morning, the Prabhupada's explaining Vaikuntha, and then he correctly and very generously said, a devotee also has anxiety. Then he described the anxiety that he feels. A devotee feels. How to spread the movement, how to make things relevant. Some persons become enemies, how to protect the property. Anxiety. But it's for Krishna. That's not material anxiety. It may feel like or look like for one that's not mature, but it facilitates, it arises from attachment to Krishna, and it facilitates attachment to Krishna. And therefore, transcendental emotion doesn't just get whitewashed, it has variety. So Vaikuntha, no anxiety, means, especially if you're attracted to Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan, there's going to be anxiety. The gopis were anxiety. The Mother Jasoda was in anxiety. Krishna's late. Mothers. And the trees fell down. Oh, let's leave Vrindavan. Let's leave Gokula. It's a dangerous place. Krishna went herding cows in his bare feet. So he's stepping on stones and maybe thorns, and how horrible. Anxiety. It's impetus, it's the byproduct of love for Krishna. So if you don't want transcendental emotions, become an impersonalist. But if you want transcendental loving emotions, be prepared for what may, from the material vantage point, look like negative emotions, but it's to be understood as ecstasies for the devotee. Okay, so here's Bhaktisiddhanta's summary, or gloss of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary. If one does not act with mind fixed on Krishna, then the demigods will create obstacles. This is being explained here. The word jnana means, quote, ascertaining the purport of the Vedas, unquote. Jnana means ascertaining the purport of the Vedas. The word vijnana means to realize that purport. One must possess both. When one is self-realized, one automatically becomes satisfied. In that condition, one becomes the object of affection of those who have demigod bodies. This is confirmed in the Vedas, wherein it is stated, Atma yesham sa bhavatiti. Such a soul is very joyful. Thereafter, the demigods no longer create any disturbance. That's Vishwanath's commentary. Here's BBT, and then Vishwanath, and we'll wrap it up for this morning. As explained in Bhagavad Gita, one whose mind is free from material desire becomes disinterested in demigod worship, since the purpose of such worship is material amelioration. The demigods, however, are never displeased with one who becomes a pure devotee of Lord Krishna and offers all his worship to the Lord. The demigods themselves are humble servants of Lord Krishna, as was amply demonstrated in Lord Krishna's pastimes on earth. One who can experience the eternal soul within everyone's body certainly becomes dear to all living beings. Since he is everyone, he sees everyone as qualitatively equal to himself. He does not envy anyone, nor try to lord it over other living beings. Being free from envy and a well-wisher of all, such a self-realized soul is naturally dear to everyone, as stated in the Song of the Six Goswamis, Dira Dira Jana Priyo. Okay, here's Bhakti Siddhanta's purport. Due to lack of knowledge regarding the Supreme Lord, Vrajendra Nandana, who is one without a second, the impersonalists cannot understand that both the object of worship and the worshippers are situated in the eternal spiritual kingdom. Paragraph. But because the eternal devotees of Krishna, who accept the personal form of the Lord and who are expert in seeing spiritual variegatedness, are blissful due to realizing their service to Krishna, they become liberated from the conception of seeing the difference between the body and the owner of the body. In such a state, the insignificance of the four objectives of life is exposed. Those who are devoid of love for Hari and who glorify the concept of impersonalism, which is a snare of Hari's illusory energy, Maya, face an impediment in their path of self-realization. As a result, they bring about their own ruination, as did Kamsa, Jarasandha, and so on. Theoretical knowledge can be purified when it is practically applied. I'll just read a little bit more. This is Vishwanath's commentaries, quite short. If one controls the mind and neglects to perform karmas, the devatas will create obstacles. Being fixed in understanding the real meaning of the Vedas, jnana, and in realization of that meaning, vijnana, consequently being satisfied in mind, along with realization of Atma, and thus being the object of affection by all beings, you will not be checked by obstacles. Quotes Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, which says, quote, the devatas do not create obstacles for the person who has realized Atma. You just have to realize Atma. Jiva Goswami's Krama Sandarbha is really short. Being fully endowed with the conclusion of the Vedas and its realization, satisfied by realization of a Brahman, being the object of affection of all beings, you will not be checked by any obstacles. In this case, Atma means Brahman. That's Jiva Goswami's. So Atma obviously can mean different things. The section that we're going to be discussing on Sunday is Canto 3, Chapter 6. And that's the universal form and the process of creation and so forth. There, the word Atma specifically means the individual soul. And here, in commentary, the Atma is spread everywhere. Commentary says it's not that an individual soul becomes all-pervasive Vishnu, but there are souls everywhere. So Atma means that Another rendering, Jiva Goswami is saying, Atma in this case means Brahman, because Brahman is everywhere. And the point is, same as the discussion yesterday evening, our acharyas have different realizations, taking the text and applying the text so that it's consistent with the primary teachings of the cyclic succession. They have the realizations. Atma can mean Brahman, Atma can mean the Jiva, Atma in many cases, in the sections that we've been reading from Brahma's prayers, Atma can mean the Supreme Parabrahman or Paramatma, or the Supreme Atma. It can mean Krishna. It can mean Paramatma. It can mean the Jiva. It can mean, there's meanings need to be understood in context, and we need guidance from our acharyas how to properly understand what are the options to be considered. So that's a detail. That the essence, Krishna is giving a step-by-step procedure of how to realize him for worldly people, because that was the question. People that are attached to the temporary, like me, can you give a really simple way that we can realize you? They can realize you, I and persons like me. So it's very appropriate for us to understand what Krishna is saying. And it's a little complicated. The simpler, less complicated is Bhagavad Gita, but to understand the application of that principle, it's fleshed out a little bit. And what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, involvement with the material energy. Krishna isn't inviting isn't inviting Uddhava to do what Arjuna wanted to do. Go to the forest, live in a cave, and be a hermit. He's not advising that. He's advising, don't be attached. Don't give up the affinity of material attachment and take to the position of exclusive devotion. But you have to give up the affinity for the temporary to become an exclusive devotee. Mahishananya yogina bhaktir avyabhicharini. You have to let go of the temporary, the attachment to the temporary, the material attachment, the material enjoyment tendency. And then comes this other. The philosophy is to see all things as spread from the Atma. So like our world experience is orchestrated by Prakriti for us, and there's like lots of living entities around us, not just us, but for the fulfillment, as Kali Yuga progresses, or as time progresses, the configuration of matter changes. Who knows what Chicago looked like before the European settlers got here? And who knows what this place is going to look like after some time, and so forth. So time changes the configuration of matter, and time changes configuration of matter according to the age of mankind that we're passing through, and the corresponding to the desires of living entities. So there's objects, and there's experience of those objects. It keeps changing and changing and changing. The principle doesn't change. What things look like will change. And so don't be attached to, it looks like this today, and I want it to look like that tomorrow. We want to be in service to, so if you take the position of service to Krishna, the point that's being emphasized here is the obstacles from material nature presented by the demigods will fade. It's not that you will never have obstacles, but they'll assist, because because on the strength of bhakti, they'll assist. Like, let's take Prabhupada. There were obstacles, but the obstacles removed. And, ultimately, because they're servants of Krishna. And Krishna is the controller. Okay, so here's a little message from chapter 10, verse number 9. Nice graphics. If one engages the senses in the service of the personality of Godhead, then one enjoys unlimited pleasure upon seeing the transcendental beauty of the Lord's form. And here's another. Therefore, every conditioned soul should end his unnecessary separation from the personality of Godhead by rejoining the Lord's blissful company. And the last illustration, Bilvamangala Thakur and Krishna, reads, Lord Krishna personally comes down to reopen the blind eyes of the conditioned souls, and thus the Lord is personally teaching Uddhava so that sincere souls in the future might take advantage of his instructions. So we're ready to wrap up for this morning. 8:15. Let's see if there's some discussion. Oh, Shravanamanga. There you go.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Okay, so just speak a little bit.
My question is the mode of goodness will take you to the devotional service. How to be always situated in the mode of goodness. Sometimes.
Take you to devotional service.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
So, now the question again.
How to be. Yeah. Always.
Well, there's do's and there's don'ts. And we follow the do's and we avoid the don'ts. That constitutes the mode of goodness. That will carry you to the mode of goodness. That's just the external, the do's and the don'ts. And there's some basics. Like chapter 16, divine mind, follow the divine. Follow the divine and avoid the divine. Those are injunctions. Just exactly on topic, injunctions, prohibitions. They're to help facilitate coming to the mode of goodness. And those that have come to the mode of goodness are eligible for becoming devotees of Vishnu, or vice versa. Those who become devotees of Vishnu become decorated with those qualities. And both ways of looking at it, Prabhupada explains appropriately. So you follow the injunctions and stay away from the prohibitions.
Thank you, Maharaj. And another one?
Yeah.
You mentioned, whenever we doing devotional service, there will be obstacles. Even Prabhupada also faced obstacles.
Yes.
So, why if that's Jiva's activities to engage in the service of the Lord, then is there obstacles if it comes in the Jivas? So it will be again. It doesn't involve. It doesn't again make him to do the service again.
It doesn't do what?
It doesn't person doesn't want to engage again in the service because it is frequently facing obstacles. How to overcome that?
I don't follow your question.
So my question is, discourage the obstacles in devotional service.
You get to desist from that service. How do you overcome the fact that I feel discouraged
Yes,
by
ma'am.
obstacles? That's your question?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Faith and good association. Obstacles can have a discouraging, or obstacles can have a enthusing capacity. For one who has faith and one who has good association, let me intensify my shelter taking, my dependence, because I may have been moving along with a doership mentality, or, I'm going to get this done mentality. And Krishna doesn't like that. So the obstacle may help you take deeper shelter of Krishna instead of just the effort that you're making to get something done. Practical service. So faith and good association. And faith is nourished by reading scripture regularly, applying the scripture, getting realization. Faith increases. All similarly through association. Okay.
Guru Maharaj, regarding the example of one who goes to the New York airport but does not catch the flight to London is no better than anybody else in New York. Doesn't simply being in the mode of goodness without approaching transcendence give a person a better footing, perhaps a better footing, perhaps in the next life?
Yes.
And it seems to me that it's...
Mm-hmm. Knowledge may help them get a foothold. But the foothold purpose is then fulfilled unless one uses it in the proper manner, because otherwise it can lead to pride or other things.
It seems to me that even if persons are not approaching God, if they're at least in the mode of goodness, the world is a better place.
From a relative point of view.
Yes.
From a relative point of view. From an absolute point of view, any place in the material world is necessary. Yes. From a transcendental point of view. It's all a place of misery. Better misery. It's better. It's better from the material point of view. It's meant to show all of the purpose of the Vedas is to know Krishna. The purpose of helping one get to goodness is to know Krishna. It's not to just be better. Because if it is just to be better, then Krishna will be given from a transcendental point of view.
Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj was speaking about the fact that bhakti is obstructed as long as there is a mood of enjoyment. And I understand that this is referring to mood of enjoying for oneself or materially tinged. Now also, the soul by nature is pleasure seeking, and there is naturally enjoyment when the soul is feeling some connection to Krishna, even though it may not be the fullness of. So we have that experience. We have some pleasure that we are deriving, and it's impelling us forward in devotional service. And we also understand that there's a huge mix. I'm wondering how to tread this territory carefully, because I am experiencing pleasure. At the same time, I want to be careful of, not letting my bhakti get obstructed by that pleasure.
This is the question for those who want to progress in the path of bhakti, and the standard and the cultivation here is the thought that Krishna should be pleased at the center. To the degree that's not at the center, then to that degree there's mix, and the happiness is tinged and will fade as time passes, because pure devotion doesn't fade. Advancing on the bhakti path requires this kind of question, and that we need to be cautious. At the same time, we need to be enthusiastic, and not for the purpose of the what's in it for me, but the natural, the greater happiness is Krishna being pleased. That's bhakti. That's the greatest happiness. Okay. Someone else? Online?
Kirti Prakash. Hare Krishna Maharaj. My friends who are spiritually inclined but not followers of Krishna consciousness have this misunderstanding that in Krishna consciousness, Krishna is the only enjoyer, and all practitioners have to suffer to give pleasure to the Lord. How do I help them with their misunderstanding?
Kick them. I'm getting pleasure from kicking. No. It's the higher principle is a principle of my happiness is Krishna's happiness. It's not I'm suffering and therefore Krishna's happy. Krishna wants us to be happy, but he wants us to get real happiness, and the real happiness is his happiness. So that this spiritual friends of yours just need to adjust their conception of what Krishna's happiness is. Krishna's happiness is not your suffering. Krishna's happiness is you come to pure devotion, and that's his happiness.
And another question. Some people believe they can reach spiritual bliss by unrestricted sense enjoyment. Such people obviously do not believe in the Vedas. How to discuss spirituality with such people?
Well, it depends on the individual, how you discuss spirituality with them. Here's some options. You can take a look at scripture. You can take a look at the quality of life where unrestricted sense pleasure, hedonism, has prevailed, and where does it take? You can speak about the consequence of in this life, next life, what comes. You can speak about not just next life, but in this life, those who abuse the senses by unrestricted sense enjoyment, so many miseries, disease, etc., result. You can use examples. Supposing you go to a physician and the physician says, follow this diet and take this medicine, and you just do whatever you want, then you're aggravating the disease. So it depends on the person, what their capacity and their degree of attachment is.
This is from Namapriya Devidasi. What makes the individual souls different from each other? Is it the relationship with the Lord?
On the spiritual platform, yes. On the material platform, it has everything to do with guna and karma. Swabhava, in the material sense, is largely the modes of nature, and the modes of nature are impacting karma and vice versa. Karma is impacting the modes of nature, and they're impacting karma. So, guna and karma for the conditioned soul, but it's not what individuality really is. And the spiritual individuality is one's relationship with Krishna.
This is from Raja Ramachandran. In today's class, there is reference regarding realized soul is not hampered by external disturbance. We observe in the Avanti Brahman pastime, he attributes that root cause of suffering reactions as dualities.
Oh, it's the mind.
He says, in mind.
Yes, the root cause of the suffering in Avanti Brahman story is the mind, and the mind is influenced this way, that way.
Although we see that he is still facing karmic effects of his bad dealings with people in his earlier conditioned life. So the question, the self-realized soul sees even his karmic reactions as dualities.
Yes.
And not get disturbed by them?
Yes. And to not be disturbed by them is not just the negation of the karmic reactions, distancing oneself and thus, becoming a passive blob that doesn't get influenced by karmic reactions. It's the affinity for Krishna's shelter and service that permits one the position of not being disturbed by past karmic reactions coming your way. Good or bad?
Okay, Snehavali Devidasi asks, as Jiva Goswami is saying in verse 10 commentary that Atma means Brahman, I'm curious to know how knowing Brahman will please the other living entities and demigods, because that's how the verse is translated. Is it only by knowing one aspect of Krishna?
No. The reference specifically is to the 6 Goswamis, Dhira, Dhira, etc. And they were engaged in devotional service on such a level that they were not perceived by those who are envious, the Adhira folks. They didn't want anything from the Adhira folks, so they didn't see them as enemy. They saw them, they treated them in a friendly manner, and they were seen by the Adhira folks as objects of affection. But so in this case, the Brahman platform means spiritual platform, and from that spiritual platform, bhakti begins. Look at, the Brahma Bhuta verse and you'll understand what I'm saying.
And she has a second question. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary on verse 9 states that, see that enjoyer, the jiva, situated in me as the controller, Paramatma. adhishvare. How can Jiva be seen as the Paramatma?
It's under the shelter of Paramatma. That's how it's to be seen.
And another question here from Abhishek Deshmukh. What should be the course of action for one whose faith in source of hearing, speaker, or literature keeps fluctuating?
What's the advice for such a person, or what's the situation for such a person?
What should be the course of action?
For ISKCON devotees, read Prabhupada's books. And for someone who's not yet identifying themselves as an ISKCON devotee, then find some authority who you can take full shelter and stay there and hear from that authority. Protected from what the question is asking. My answer is a faith-based answer, where your faith goes and the connection is with a bona fide representative of the personality of Godhead through disciplic succession. Go there and stay there. Be protected. One more question in the back.
Guru Maharaj, on the point of the devatas don't create obstacles for one who's realized Atma, it seems easy to explain the obstacles that, for instance, Nanda Maharaj faced when he was kidnapped by Varuna's agents, or Indra or Lord Brahma creating obstacles. It seems we can explain those as the demigods are cooperating in the pastimes of Lord Krishna. What about the obstacles that some demigods like Lord...
What about the obstacle of what?
What about the obstacles that some demigods create, such as when, Lord Indra gets insecure when he sees somebody doing austerities, and I forget who exactly it was, but Lord Indra went and gave him a sword. It was a king that was doing austerities, and...
Are you clear what your question is? Because I'm not. Are you clear what your question is? Huh?
So we do hear examples.
The Varuna example is clear. What's the contrasting example?
I've heard of examples where where Lord Indra creates obstacles for devotees who are meditating, thinking that they want to become powerful, they want to take my position. How do we?
But that's not obstacles to achieve bhakti. And if one's effort is to achieve bhakti, it bounces. It doesn't stick, and it gets removed. It's similar to the Varuna obstacle,
Okay.
or pastime. Okay, Prabhupada ki? Jai.